Hi, everyone. Good morning. Thank you so much for joining us. Can you hear me okay? Is it too loud? Wonderful. Okay, so I am so excited to finally be here. This has been a project we've been talking about for almost a year come January, and so we're so excited to share it with the public, and you are the public. My name is Neysa Page-Lieberman, and you are at the monument launch for Trespassers Beware, Fort Conley, and Wyandot Women Warriors. And this is part of Wyandot Weekend, and this is in collaboration with Kansas City Rep Theater, the Wyandot Nation of Kansas, and many others who we'll talk about. Wyandot Weekend kicked off last night with the premiere staged reading of Madeline Easely's new play, Representatives for Those at Peace. And so today, in day two, we have a lot of activities planned, and this whole weekend is about celebrating, honoring, interpreting, discussing the story of the Conley sisters, the Wyandot Conley sisters, and their incredible, historic, some would say sacred battle to save the now called National Wyandot Burying Ground, at the time called the Huron Cemetery. So that's what we're here to do. I am feeling very privileged to have a small role in the assistance of facilitating this story that is the story of the Wyandot Nation of Kansas. So I would like to tell you a little bit about what's going to happen today. So don't worry, I won't be up here the whole time talking. I will eventually have the honor of passing this off to my esteemed colleagues. But we're going to basically introduce this project to you. And what you're seeing on the slides is a twofold. First, we wanted to give you some images about first the story. So the first half of this presentation, which is going to rotate. So don't worry if you miss something, it'll come back. The first half is things we've pulled from the archive, photographs of the sisters, historic ground plans of the cemetery, and headlines. Some of these headlines of the time you absolutely will not believe. And then the second part is public artworks that are inspiring us right now. And they are made by Indigenous artists and or in collaboration with Indigenous nations of North America. So you'll be seeing those, and you'll have kind of a window into our thought process and where we're going with this. At the wrap up of the panel discussion, we have a couple optional activities for you. One of them is that a group of us will be walking right over to the cemetery. And so if you haven't been there before, you'll be able to go to this incredibly historic place that, thanks to the Conley sisters, is still there for us to visit. You'll be able to see their gravestones, their families' final resting place. You also have the opportunity to walk over to the Kansas City, Kansas Public Library, which is just a half a block away, where our colleague and collaborator, Ann Lacey, a librarian there, has pulled some things from the Kansas collection, which includes an archive of the Conley sisters. And so she has graciously pulled some things out so you can see things that relate to what we're showing today in real life. So that's going to be happening afterwards. Before I continue, I have the honor of thanking some of our collaborators. So first and foremost is Chief Judith Manthe of the Wyandot Nation of Kansas. She is the leader of this project, bringing passion, expertise, so much knowledge and care, and none of this would be happening without her. And next to her is Second Chief Louisa Libby, who's also brought passion, dedication, and just labor to this, right? It takes all of the above. Next, I would like to thank Chief Billy Friend and Kim Garcia of the Wyandotte Nation of Oklahoma, who knew that we wanted to have this program near the cemetery and made it possible by getting us this space. And so we're really thankful for their generosity and their dedication to telling the story as well. I'd also like to thank the Humanities Kansas Council, who gave us our very first grant. So we are now a granted project. It's very exciting to announce that. So this is the first project that that is covered by Humanities Kansas, and so we're so excited. They are sponsoring interpretation, promotion, and public programming like this. I also want to thank the Hilton, Randy, the event coordinator, who probably isn't in here right now, graciously worked within our very nonprofit budget to donate a lot of things in kind that you see here today. I also want to thank my colleague, Marcela Andrade, who's actually based in Chicago, but she works with me in my organization, Monumenta, and did the presentation and the surveys and the promotion. So Marcela Andrade, thank you from afar. Next, I would like to offer a land acknowledgement and say a little bit about the land back movement. So this is courtesy of our partners at Kansas City Rep, the acknowledgement part. We would like to acknowledge that we are on the traditional, ancestral, and current home of Native American, Indigenous, and First Nations people. We ask you to join us in acknowledging the many tribal groups from our areas, including Osage, Kaw, Missouri, Shawnee, and Wyandot tribes. We honor the elders, both past and present, and this calls on us to commit to learn their stories and how to be better stewards of the land that we occupy. To this land acknowledgement, our group wanted to add a little bit about the land back movement, which very much connects to what we're talking about today. So if you are unfamiliar with that movement, it's an Indigenous-led environmental, cultural, and political movement that wants Indigenous land back in Indigenous hands. Acquiring sovereignty over stolen lands is a goal, but land back also reclaims things associated with land, like language, culture, housing, and education. This movement has been active for generations as tribal nations defend their right over ancestral territories. More recently, the NDN Collective launched the Land Back campaign that catapulted the movement and mobilized Indigenous communities and non-Indigenous allies in the fight for environmental justice and tribal sovereignty. So in our discussions, we have talked about the many movements that the Conley sisters impacted, inspired, informed, kicked off, and the Land Back movement is definitely one of those. At this time, I would like to invite Chief Judy up here to say some words about peacekeeping.
Thank you, Neysa. This has been such a pleasure working with Neysa and the whole crew. I mean, this is just awesome. I'm so excited to be involved in this. I had been asked several times to make a comment about our kind of a land acknowledgement. Well, we don't give land acknowledgements. The Europeans do. So at 4 o'clock in the morning, I just sat up in bed and I thought, this is it. So this is how I feel. This is my feelings of how we should treat the land and everything. We, the Indigenous people, are people of the earth. We never claim to own the land. It's ours to steward, to care for and protect. We were given a place on the land to live, a gift from the great Creator. We were given the resources to live, using only what we needed to thrive. When we needed, we moved to allow the land to recover and regrow. We never destroyed or depleted the land. We cared for the land and her resources. We honor Mother Earth and the sky above to keep time and to live by the changing seasons of our grandmother, the moon. Elder brother, the sun, warms the land and us, making the plants to grow. The four winds are sent for the changing of the seasons. The thunderers bring the much-needed rains to refresh the earth. I give many thanks to the Great Spirit for all he provides. Every bit of land we have ever lived on or were moved to has been taken out of greed for man to own. All treaties have been broken, and we have had to assimilate to survive. And this thought came to me this morning, so I added this. Even though they've tried to rid us, we live on. We survived. We are Wyandot people, a strong nation of 4 confederacies. Wyandot in Canada, the Wyandot Nation of Wyandot in Detroit, Wyandot Nation of Kansas, and the Wyandot Nation in Oklahoma. And then there's a poem that I just love, so I'm going to read it to you. The explanation is that we have two solaces every year. June 21st brings the busy, warm months to grow and to harvest, while December 21st brings a time for the land and us to rest. We're coming to this time of rest. Please allow me to read this poem. I just love it. It's the Solace Carol by the Weird Sisters. A fire is burning, the long night draws near. All who need comfort are welcomed here. We'll dance 'neath the stars and toast the past year, for the spirit of solace is still living here. We'll count all our blessings while the mother lies down, with snow as her blanket covering the ground. Thanks to the mother for the life that she brings. She'll waken to warm us again in the spring. The poor and the hungry, the sick and the lost. These are our children, no matter the cost. Come by the fire, the harvest to share, for the spirit of solace is still living here.
Thank you so much, Chief Judy. Another way I feel so honored and appreciative to be in this space with these extraordinary people. So I'm going to transition to the panel discussion now, and I just wanted to give a little bit of background information about where we are with the monument project right now. So our inspiration for this was to use the Fort Conley that the Conley sisters built to live in and defend the cemetery as kind of a launching point for a new public artwork. So we are in the process of talking to artists about how the fort could inspire something for them. And so we have brought the second part of the slideshow. You're going to see all these images of contemporary monuments to Indigenous stories. So you can see the many, many ways that this story could be interpreted. You know, we want there to be something that references the actual structure. And if you probably saw already, we've had some slides up that show the actual fort they lived in. We want something that references that, but we're talking to artists from all kinds, that work in all kinds of mediums. So yes, people that can build architecture and structures, but also video makers, playwrights, other kinds of theater artists, painters, and people doing sound. And so, so we don't know what we're gonna get, and we're so excited about the ideas that artists will introduce to us that will surprise us and delight us and show us new avenues of learning this story, of teaching this story, of connecting our own community to the story. So we are in kind of the research process now, and then we will seek proposals, and those proposals will be presented to the Wyandot Nation, and they will select the one that best interprets and represents their story. So another thing that is maybe unique about this project is that it's going to be a mobile monument. And I'm not going to tell you what we mean by that just now, because I'm going to save that for the panel, but it's something we're really excited about, and something that when we get to the Q&A portion, we would love to hear your feedback about it as well. Okay, now I get to read bios. Okay, starting with Chief Judith Manthe. She is the principal chief of the Wyandot Nation of Kansas, having been elected in 2020. She grew up on a farm south of Lansing, Kansas, and has always been active in the community with 4-H, Fair Board, church, and anywhere she is needed. In her own words, she says, quote, "Serving my nation is most important to me, teaching our story to any and all for better recognition and community involvement. I always knew my history, as my grandmother Edith Zane Youngins instilled stories of my ancestors. Never forget your 5th great-grandfather, Chief Tarhe," she would tell me. Reading from her book about Zanesfield, Ohio, I learned a bit about my history. Even though we never talked about our Native heritage, I knew who I was. My grandmother knew back then, telling my cousin and I that we would work together to bring our nation together. Thank you, Chief Judy. Next, second Chief Louisa Libby. She is the second chief of the Wyandot Nation of Kansas. She also is the lead for the historical archives and oral history projects and the website administrator. Louisa grew up knowing of her Wyandot heritage from her grandmother. She heard stories of her ancestors' removal from Ohio and the role they played in shaping Wyandot City. Her grandmother, Grindle, was part of a group of local Wyandots that continued the fight to protect the cemetery from being sold and destroyed, even taking the fight to Washington, D.C. in the 1960s. One of Louisa's passions is preserving and protecting the old Quindaro town site and Underground Railroad. The Wyandots were an integral part of the town and aided those escaping from slavery to seek freedom. Louisa has served in various roles on the Executive Council and devotes her life to the protection, preservation, and teaching of the Wyandot culture and history. Madeline Easely, she, her pronouns, is a Wyandot artist whose work as a playwright and performer converges at the intersection of magical realism and elevation of tribal sovereignty, the inherent right of tribal nations to govern themselves. Born in Kansas City, Missouri, Madeline is a proud citizen of the Wyandotte Nation of Oklahoma Porcupine Clan. Madeline is the inaugural 4 Directions resident playwright for 2023, plus a 2022 Greenhouse Playwriting resident at Space on Ryder Farm, and a 2021 First Peoples Fund Cultural Capital Fellow. Madeline is one of 6 filmmakers who premiered short films at We the Peoples before in 2022 at the Kennedy Center. Her plays include Feast for the Dead, Shift, and Representatives for Those at Peace, a new play commissioned by Casey Rep about Lyda Conley and her protection of the Wyandot National Burying Ground in Kansas City, Kansas. Thank you, Madeline. And now on to Tai. Tai Edwards is a history professor and director of the Kansas Studies Institute at Johnson County Community College. Her research interests include North American colonization, U.S. imperialism, indigenous peoples, gender, and environmental history. Her book, Osage Women and Empire, Gender and Power, examined how Osage gender complementarity was central to the rise of an Osage empire in the 18th century and in resisting U.S. colonization in the 19th century. Her article, Disruption and Disease, the Osage Struggle to Survive in the 19th Century Trans-Missouri West, received the Edgar Langsdorff Award. She has collaborated on a variety of projects, including Between the Rock and a Hard Place and Sacred Red Rock, that have worked toward rematriation of a sacred boulder to the Kaw Nation. I am Neysa Page-Lieberman. Let's see, who am I? Okay, so I am a public art curator, a writer, and educator. I've led arts programs in Chicago, including the Department of Exhibitions and Performance Spaces at Columbia College Chicago, and the Wabash Arts Corridor, and lectured at the Art Institute of Chicago. I also co-founded Monuments to Movements. I've been in Kansas City since 2020. Yay! And I was recently awarded a grant from Charlotte Street Foundation for a curatorial project called Kansas City's Removal Act, The Reckoning of Andrew Jackson Monuments. And I'm currently launching a new organization here in Kansas City called Monumenta, which co-creates commemorative public art projects that tell the stories of our shared past and imagine creative futures. Okay, we get to chat now.
Yeah. Should we pick them up, do you think, or?
I think we should pick them up.
Okay.
Yes, thank you. Okay, we are going to start off with telling the story of the Conley sisters. And so we're going to start with Louisa, who is going to walk us through a brief history of how the Wyandots got here to Kansas City and the significance of the cemetery. Judy is then going to pick it up with sharing the story of the Conley sisters' long battle to defend their cemetery and keep it in Indigenous hands. So, would you like to start? Thank you.
Huyamataru. Yuranaway Bijatsi. Welcome, friends. My Wyandot name is Yuranaway, and it means woman holding up the sky. I am Wyandot Nation, and I am of the Big Turtle Clan. Wanted to give you just a brief overview of how we got to Kansas. We were a tribe of nearly 40,000 up in the Ontario area, Upper Ontario. And in 1649, we ended up splitting with our group. There were battles of the fur trade back then, and there was a certain Iroquois Confederacy that basically wanted to annihilate, and others for that reason. So we ended up moving and escaping down through Detroit, Michilimackinac. We had all kinds of places that we had run to. When we got to Detroit, there was a portion that wanted to split and go down to Ohio. But there's also a story about that Wyandots typically always had two communities nearby, two villages nearby each other. That way, if there was ever a problem with the crops, or if there was a problem with disease or anything like that, then your sister village, you would have someplace to go. Down in Ohio, just like with the Andrew Jackson Removal Act of 1830, all tribes east of the Mississippi were to go west of the Mississippi, and that caught us up. At one time in Ohio, we basically had over half the state. That was our reserve. By the end, and before we moved to Ohio, we were down to 12 square miles. So there are stories that our chiefs had walked with George Washington, and he basically said that you're either with us or we'll kill you and take the land anyway. So the Wyandots up there, our families assimilated, and were doctors, lawyers, had businesses. We tried to assimilate so that we could stay on our land and be up there. And that did not happen because we were still of Indian blood. So in 1843, we were the last tribe to leave Ohio. And the day before we left, the sermon was preached at our mission church up there. And it's still standing today. And they still have services. If you're ever up there on Sundays, it's wonderful. But in July of 1843, we were to leave. Well, the night before the sermon, the most important thing to the Wyandots was their dead. Because you needed to take care, and it was in the sermon, who's going to take care of the graves of our families? Who's going to put the leaves on them and do all these traditional things that they did? They did not want to leave their dead, their families. And that was extremely important. And it was extremely important, you'll see, as part of the Conley sisters and their fight. That went through generations. So in 1843, we had to walk, move, horse, carriage, down. We had to leave all of our buildings, all of our structures, and we could only take what we could get in the back of a buggy or carriage. And so we ended up walking from Upper Sandusky, Ohio, down to the Cincinnati River. And all along the way, people were out looking to see these savage Indians, and what did they look like? Well, we looked like everyone else because we were dressed even better than some. We carried ourselves with dignity, and we walked through towns, and people were astonished because they thought they had a different vision, a more stereotypical. So when we got to Cincinnati, there were two steamboats waiting, the Nottoway and the Republic, and they were to take us down the Ohio River and through the Mississippi, and then a little bit south of Cape Girardeau basically is where it joins in, and then you come back up the Mississippi and then across the Missouri. That was the trail to get us. It took 2 weeks. But when we went to board the steamboats, there was a child that had the measles or some kind of communicable disease. So that does play a part of a role after our journey. And also, when we got there, the captain of the steamboat, he was disgusted with these dirty Indians, and they're gonna be on his boat, so he took up all the carpet, all the furnishings, and put them aside, and then just brought us in like cattle. And so for those 2 weeks that it took, we were to here in Kansas City when we arrived. They said we would get dropped off at Westport Landing, which is down by River Market. That did not happen. He came and dropped us off at West Bottoms, by near the Kaw and the Missouri juncture where they. So another thing, we were promised all this land. We had a group of men that came a year or two before to make arrangements, and with the Shawnee and others, this is the land that will be available when we get here. It wasn't. That land was what is now Westport, the plaza, down through Fort Parkway. It was a very good piece of land. And so they withdrew that. That wasn't there. So what happened was we were dumped in the West Bottoms. Off to the side, there were only a few people that had access to be able to even afford to stay somewhere. So the rest of the people were left on the banks to fend for themselves, and through winter and then spring. And then in spring of 1844 came the Great Flood. And so we lost many of our dead to illness and sickness, as cholera and other things came through. So we lost over 100 of our people. There were 664 that got on the boats. So if we lost 100 to 200, that's a third of your tribe. So here we have our dead. We can't bury them. What's going to happen? So we don't have any land. Well, we had a relationship with the Delaware from when we were up in Ohio, and the Delaware were gracious enough. We came to an agreement that they sold us 138,000 acres here, which is basically what you know now as Kansas City, Kansas, and what you know as what would be Wyandot County, most of Wyandot County. They also threw in 3 additional tracts because of when we were up in Ohio, we helped them out with some land when they needed it. So we have a very good relationship with the Delaware. We even have a relationship now with them. It doesn't matter, time does not matter, we are still all one people. The indigenous communities, you would be surprised. So from there, when we were able to get across to the land, which is at the confluence of the Missouri and Kansas, is that corner, we looked for the highest ground to bury our dead. And we took them over in blankets and had mass burials. And if you go up to the cemetery, you'll see that. There's mass burials, there's plaques that'll say, they believe 200 buried here or 400 buried there. And there's probably at least 1,000 graves, if not more. There's no way to tell. And a lot of the headstones there's a lot of vandalism up there through the years and weathered on the headstones. So, but it's a beautiful, beautiful, peaceful place. And when you go there, it drowns out all the city and the noise. So I will let Chief Judy take it from here, and she will talk more about the cemetery and about the Conley sisters.
I'm going to back up a little bit. When we first came, Louisa mentioned the boy that was sick. We had 60 people immediately that year that died of disease. And that was our initial bout to the cemetery to bury our dead. The next year the flood came, and the flood was so intense, they said after the waters went down, the buffalo were dead buffalo, hung in the tops of the trees. We lost over 100 then. So there's 160 immediately out of that 600 that first came. The Conley sisters battle is a very interesting one. You know, we reverence our dead, we honor our dead. Our dead are very important to us. And we just left Ohio and had everything stripped from us. We did not have our cemeteries. We did not have our dead to go take care of their graves, their headstones. So years went by. A lot are buried there. There are a lot of chiefs that are buried there. When the Conley sisters' sister died, Sally, they buried her there. They buried my grandmother, Hannah Zane. The Conley sisters are my first cousins, 3 times removed. So their grandparents were my grandparents. A few years later, not too many, I think it was a few months later, the mother and father died. We don't know 100% of what was going around then, influenza, cholera. There were so many different diseases going around in those early days. But they were brokenhearted at being left alone. They had already gone with their parents to the cemetery to take care of the graves. So when their parents and Sally were there, they were totally devastated. And then Kansas City comes in and says, we're going to sell the cemetery. We're going to take the bones up and we're going to move them to Quindaro Cemetery. Oh, not on your life. And I'll tell you one thing about Wyandot women. When you tell them they can't do something, they're going to do it.
Amen.
The fortitude that those gals had, and Maddie's play does so well on tying things together. It's such a huge story to tell. She can't get everything in there, but what she does get in there was good last night, and I was so pleased. And I couldn't believe the amount of people that came for the reading. It was amazing. It was so exciting, and the questions people asked too were just awesome. But to get back to the cemetery, there were also, to tie this in together, there was the Battle of Westport during the Civil War. There were a black unit that were killed at Westport. No one would allow them to be buried anywhere near Westport. We welcomed them. So their burials are there. Now, some of them were removed and taken to family sites, which was fine. We do not know the names of them, but they are very important. Also, to back up a little bit, we had the Underground Railroad going on in Ohio. We had Negro Town, which was next to Upper Sandusky. We helped anyone that came for help. We would wait until we would have time or a planned trip to get them to the shores and to row them from island to island into Ontario. There is a community in Ontario, Collinswood, that there is an Underground Railroad museum there too. I'm getting kind of off track here. But the Conley sisters, I mean, it was such a heartbreaking story. How do you allow someone to come in and dig up your dead, dig up your loved ones? Helena, she was quite the gal. They all encouraged Lida to go to law school. She went to law school. She got her degree. She fought for that cemetery in Topeka court, then went to the Supreme Court to fight for the protection, which she lost and was devastated over. Helena put curses on people. And they decided when they lost, okay, this isn't going to stop. Okay, we're going to set up. We marched up the steps to the gates of the cemetery. And there's a picture I have in 1850s of the original gates. They marched up those steps. They shut those gates. They chained them shut. They hung a sign up that said, "Trespassers Beware." They went over and they built a shack, and I'm sure they had help with the other Wyandot people because we were all behind them. It wasn't just the Conley sisters. The whole Wyandot Nation was behind. Kansas was behind them. We had our dead buried there. They built the shack. They put up a spiked fence around the shack, and they moved in for 2 solid years. Winter, summer, the worst of the winter, the hottest of the summer. They stayed there, and they protected that cemetery, chasing off anybody that neglected or tried to get on there to, anybody that didn't have respect for the cemetery, they were off. And my father told a story when he was a young boy. His dad took him and they went to Minnesota Avenue and he was getting a haircut, maybe the dentist appointment or something. And Daddy walked up the hill to the cemetery and was confronted immediately by Helena. "What are you doing here? You don't belong here." And he says, "But I'm here to see my baby brother's grave." And she says, "What is the name?" And he said, "Zangre Younghans." And she says, "You are one of us." And she welcomed him in. They sat down. They talked. She gave him pieces of candy or whatever. And she told him his history. But, those women were the absolute determination of protecting that cemetery, and that is exactly what they did. I think I'll let it go at that.
Every time I hear the two of you tell this story, I learn more. You have so much knowledge. So thank you for sharing it with us. I really want to hear you talk about it all day. Like, I haven't heard that story about Helena. I just love it. It's so incredible and rich. Okay, so I would like to now transition to Maddie and Tai to talk about the intersection of arts and education in this story. So we all know there's not nearly enough published about this, especially given the Conley sisters' enduring legacy and their impact in influencing federal law and tribal sovereignty movements and many more movements than that. We know it's a story worth being shared, right? Because of your knowledge and how you have passed it on. And we know that it's worth being taught in many mediums. So yes, we want more published. We also want more artists and educators to be thinking of new innovative ways to pass on the story. So Maddie and Tai, can you talk about how art, education, and creative knowledge building can further serve this story?
Go ahead.
Well, I come from a theatrical background, so...
I want you to hold it.
Oh, yes, that's right. I come from a theatrical background, so of course, I'm a big art lover, and I think when you engage with art, something that I always keep in mind is, if you go through something, if you experience something, or you're holding something, I feel like a really key part of understanding that journey is being able to put words to it and to be able to tell that story. And I feel like once you're able to put words to it and to tell that story, you come out on the other side and you come out, whole at the end of it. And so on one hand, being able to tell this story through theater, I think is a very significant moment in the great story, of our people, of the Conley sisters, because one, it's bringing the attention to the story, but it's also, zooming in and out on that really personal level, that really epic level, to be able to bring, the humanity that art brings to stories. We can hear the history and you know, this could be a play in itself, just listening to the two of you talk about it. So yeah, I'm like, wow, let's do this too. Let's do that. Yes, and I already took even more pages of notes. That might get into the next draft. But anyway, my train of thought, art just brings another level to it, and something with Native issues, not everyone agrees, with that land is owed, and that our people have been moved, and that's a problem that has threads that go out and affect so many different issues, and you have to win people's hearts over, and you have to change their mind. Potentially, not all artists think that that's something you have to do, but I kind of think you do. And so a wonderful way to do that is through theater, to really hit on those universal themes that anyone can relate to, no matter what background they come from, no matter what you believe. Because I shared in an interview a few days ago that another playwright, who's the playwright of Flood at KC Rep, Mashab Mushtaq Dean, told me, once you understand a piece of someone's soul, how could you ever hate them? How could you ever not want, the best for them? And I think that, and I try to hold that as an artist, but I think through art, that's where we can come together, especially today when there's so much division and we disagree on things, that is like the through line of what art does for historical stories.
Okay, so I should say I'm non-native, right? I'm an academic, so I come to this from sort of a scholarly perspective. And I should say there's so much about this that's powerful, but a couple of things I want to say is, in my experience, the public and our students are hungry for more information about all of the things that you are hearing about today, and other stories related both to this place and to our nation in general. And as an educator, it's my job to do that well. And it's also my job to do that in the public sphere for people who either didn't get access to that when they were in education, or it was forgotten or done poorly or whatever that is. And so I do think, we feel the polarization, but I actually feel a lot more hunger from people for, I know enough to know that something wrong has happened. I want to know more about what that is. And I also reject the idea that we're accountable for the genocide and failures of people in the past. We are accountable for the world we live in now. And the world we live in now has the legacies of all of those things. For example, the only way I can be a resident of the place where I'm living now is because of the colonization that took place to facilitate that. And it's ignorant to think that that isn't part of the life that I'm living, right? The hierarchies around me, the structures around me. Just last year, the Kansas State Legislature was passing laws related to missing and murdered Indigenous women. That's because the things that we hear about Lida and that we saw in the play last night are not things that are gone, right? These are still things that are plaguing our society today. I also think something we have to remember, and of course, again, this is a very scholarly way to think about it, but the United States maintained two main legacies from British colonization, and those two main colonial legacies are enslavement and settler colonialism, and those are where you eliminate, in one way or another, Indigenous landowners so that the nation or the empire's settlers can possess it, or companies can possess it, or land-grant universities can possess it. And those are the legacies that we're living with now. And I know that I didn't learn that when I was young, and I didn't learn how the legacies of all of that are deeply impactful for a federally recognized tribe today. And one of the things that was so powerful about Maddie's play last night, and it's so rarely dealt with in academia or art, was how a nation is fractured to prevent people from being enrolled citizens of their nation. And Lida is a classic example, and her sisters, and everyone sitting here, right? Not Maddie, but the Wyandot Nation of Kansas folks that are with us, right? Like, this is how federal policy was built to fracture. And the more undermined the unity of a nation is, the harder it is to resist. The more they fight with each other, the less they fight with the colonizer. And I mean, those legacies are so much a part of this story. And that's why the Conley resistance is so profound, is because they were challenging so many of these inequalities. So another part of that is erasure, right? So when you eliminate a population, you can eliminate them from the land, right? We heard about Ohio removal. Well, that's That's one, and scholars like to call it removal. It's ethnic cleansing, is what it is, even though the legislation called it removal. And when people are removed, there will be death, right? If you're indigenous, where you are is who you are. And so we heard about disease death, we heard about natural disaster death. We should expect that. It happened in every single removal, and unfortunately the Wyandots are not unique. So death, right, is another form of elimination, and that's genocide, right? And of course we could talk about boarding schools, right? We could talk about all these other methods of erasure. But we also forget the stories. One of the things I like to talk about Kansas and Missouri is our place names do a better job of remembering our colonial history than we do. Wyandot County, right? Kansas, right? Missouri. All of these places are named, even Jackson, right? Even Johnson County. They are all named for colonial relationships and people experiencing colonialization. And so those are things that I want us to remember. And then one of my Con Nation colleagues who I've worked with for many years, she's always challenging me to think about, and I think this is the work you all are doing here and what Neysa's doing, is how do we live together now, right? How do we move forward now? And that's what I saw in Maddie's play last night, especially, what is the future, right? How is a future made? How did Lyda try to make a future? How is the Wyandot Nation of Kansas right now making a future? And how are we part of that future together? And I think that's one of the most exciting things about this project.
Thank you both. Once again, learning so much. So thank you so much. And we've been talking a lot, and I'm still just constantly benefiting from your knowledge and your expertise. So everybody has actually kind of built a bridge to the next question, which is about building community and audience engagement. All of you do work to, you all present to audiences in the classroom, in libraries and theaters. And so I'd like to talk about who do you most want to reach through this monument project and through this story? How can learning this history empower future generations and future public artists? And I would like you all to speak it to your own context and your own audience.
Louisa and I go out and we talk a lot. We love teaching the young kids. If a school will ask us to come, we're going to be there. I've been to historical societies. I've been to historical societies. I've got an invite to a retirement center. Anybody, so many people are interested in our history, and I love to tell my story. Our story. This is all part of each one of us. So getting the word out and just letting them see and hear what has gone on. Most people don't think, they look at Kansas City, Kansas, and they'll wind up. You mean it was named after you? Yes, it was. It was Wyandot City before Kansas City, Kansas. And it was spelled in two different ways, W-Y-A-N-D-O-T-T and W-Y-A-N-D-O-T-T-E, which it is now. The streets, notice the streets in town. I encourage everybody. There is a book that was written by Nellie McGuire that I read, and she has a lot of the addresses of the Wyandots when they came here. And I want to do I don't know how I'm going to do it. I would like to do a tour that I take people to not just the cemetery in Quindaro, but around town. And even though some of those houses are not there, show them where the Wyandots lived. My grandmother, and the house is still there, lived on 8th and Sandusky. She grew up there. I just want our history to be out there. I want people to know our story.
Like Judy, when I go out, my favorite are the children, because they're so young and they're so thirsty for knowledge, and they have their own idea of cowboys and Indians and what they think, or Indians go around in loincloths and all these. And for them to see that we are people just like them, we may not still have the characteristics because we had to assimilate in order to survive, but we're here and we've been linked and connected all these years, 400 years of back when we were all together at the last time up in by Georgian Bay. So they're very impressionable. They get very excited. And also throughout the city of Kansas City, Kansas, we have relationships, very good, close relationships with the mayor, with community, with civic groups, with individuals. Marvin Robinson, who was one of the representatives here in Kansas, he's been a longtime friend of the Wyandot. And we are also extremely connected with Quindaro and the Quindaro town site and getting it the National Historic Landmark. That's been going on for decades and a struggle. And we have brothers and sisters there that we still embrace. And the story that was told to me by Jesse Hope that was passed down, oral history is very important to Native Americans and also the Black and Brown communities, because you didn't write things down because the white man could get a hold of that. You passed the stories down verbally from generation to generation. And there are people today, the elders, that still won't necessarily speak of things openly. So we did do, through Ann Lacey at the library, there was a Quindaro oral history project. So we're still trying to go back and capture those memories of people that are willing to share what their experiences were growing up in the current Quindaro, but also the ancestral stories of what they remember. So anytime that my daughter Anna, she also does a lot of tours and presentations. Any of us, Kristen Zane is here, and her sister Holly, they go to events anytime that we can spread out and we can share our story. Like I said, the 400 years, remember, we were back in Canada, but today we have a confederacy with our four nations. Wendake, the Hurons of Wendake, they were the ones, you remember, that went and broke and they went on up into Quebec. And then the Wyandots of Anderson that are in Detroit, the Wyandot Nation of Kansas, and the Wyandot Nation down in Oklahoma. A lot of times, we talk several times a month with our brothers and sisters in all four bands. So we are still together. We didn't just survive, we thrive. And we will teach the story, and the more we teach it, and you keep that out there, then you keep your tribe and your people alive.
Wait, we'll do this one.
Yeah, I think something that's been of interest and engaging with me is intergenerational Wyandot spaces. So, we have many different generations in the room and who've been engaging with this project and the play. And I think for me, a word that keeps coming up is, I call it your cultural inheritance, which is all of these stories and this history and this rich cultural tapestry that, a lot of Wyandots we have fragmented knowledge of because we are so spread out. We also, within the Wyandots, we're very diverse. We all come from different backgrounds and different levels of how have those stories been passed on. And so I think for me, especially with the play, that's just one version of the story that I've written, that has my Maddie thing in it. But and so my hope is that when we see our stories presented like this, and shout out to the Kansas City Repertory Theater for doing it in that gorgeous space and seeing it with these very professional and kind of famous actors, and just to see our stories at that level of entertainment and professionalism, there are all these stories out there that receive that, and Native stories are often, you know, along with many other communities, often pushed aside, and come to find, you know, our stories are incredibly fascinating and entertaining. And so I think by, you know, engaging with our intergenerational spaces that by telling the stories, you know, we're hearing it and we're noting that in our experiences. And then for the youth, you know, understanding that like we can have our own things that we're really excited about, like your favorite TV show on TV, you know, covers X, Y, and Z. Well, you know, one day, like you might see your story on there, the way that other communities in this country have that, and they have that like cathartic experience. And, you know, I'm really driven. I have so many interests. I have things that I love. Like I get really passionate about certain pieces of art, and I'm like, I want that for us, that we have these characters who we know and love, and they're our ancestors, and how just amazing that is. And I really want that. Yeah.
Another thing I would say is, and again, I think Maddie's play kind of gets into this, which is one of the things I just love. We also have to reckon with the fact that in many ways, assimilation policies were effective. There are many Indigenous people, like you're referencing, Maddie, who have been denied access to their history. They also might not know a lot about their own histories. And then we also have to reckon with people like me who are non-Native scholars. We teach it maybe in an academic context, but we absolutely do not speak to it from an Indigenous context or the way like an Indigenous elder would speak to it. So I think you have to think about that even in your classroom. So like when I teach American Indian history at JCCC, we used to call it Indigenous Peoples History, which I think would be better. No one knew what it was about, so we had to change the name so that people would enroll in the class. I mean, that just shows you the barriers we're dealing with here, right? But I have students in that class every time I teach it who are Indigenous, who don't identify to me for a couple of weeks until we get into the course, because they don't want other students in the class to look at them like they're the expert in Indigenous history. They don't want you know, to have to speak for their nation, to speak for all Indigenous people in that classroom. I mean, these are the kinds of things that play out in our education systems related to these histories. I also always think about, and I think what Judy is saying is we need to educate everyone, and I think that's what you're saying too, Maddie. And Louisa, I love how you're talking about educating children. I've also done some talks related to the Kaw Nation rematriation in Lawrence that I'm a part of for young people. Which, by the way, if you want to figure out how you explain colonialism, do it for third graders, and you know how to explain it, which was a good exercise. But I think a lot about the great civil rights activist A. Philip Randolph said in one of his writings that if you want to help children, you have to help their parents. And so I think a lot about, he meant that in terms of education policy, but I also think about, if I want to teach children about this, I have to also have resources available for adults so that it can be reinforced, so they can understand. You know, you're going to have to educate multi-age folks, right? Like it's going to have to be intergenerational. And I will say, if you want a little bit of hope, the Kansas State Department of Education and the Kansas State School Board, which, you know, the Kansas State School Board is an elected body, have created a Kansas Indigenous Advisory Council that is now working to provide more resources for K-12 educators in the state, and I'm part of this, related to Indigenous history in our state. I'm actually going tomorrow to Oklahoma to do listening sessions and take notes with tribal leaders of tribes that used to be in Kansas, so that we can find out how they want their history taught to our students. And of course, as you may know, Kansas is home still to 4 federally recognized tribes, which my students never know. I'm not kidding you, it's to a person. They do not know. That's ridiculous. I even ran one of my assignments through an AI chatbot tool, and I said, what is the role of the 4 federally recognized tribes in Kansas today? And it said, there are no federally recognized tribes in Kansas today. So you can just see how even our technology mirrors that erasure and our ignorance. And so that's another thing. But I would say for you as an individual, so like if you're listening to this and you're like, what can I do? We all have some level of influence in our lives or in our professional positions. So, you know, the books you read, the art you consume, the museums you visit on a trip. So like I'm going to be down in Osage Nation tomorrow, right? Like they have one of the best tribal history museums like in the country. You know, there's the First Nations American Museum in Oklahoma City, you know, run by Indigenous people. There's all kinds of ways you can consume content, even as an individual that is Indigenous produced, that really challenges a lot of the narratives, like going to Maddie's play, right, is a great example, and the other work she's talked about. But also, if you are in a position that's professional, what does it mean to make sure that your systems are inclusive for Indigenous people to rise and succeed in them? So we talk about land acknowledgements, for example. What are your land acknowledgement actions? So if you're ever looking this up, the Kansas Association for Native American Education, and I can tell you this at the end if you want, has a land acknowledgement toolkit that they've written that gets into this exact thing, like, why are you writing this land acknowledgement? What do you hope to accomplish? And then leverage whatever it is your institution does, right? So like if I'm in higher ed, how can a higher ed institution serve Indigenous students specifically, right? That's what we do. How can we focus on making sure Indigenous students have access to that education? And that's a way of like making a land acknowledgement an action, which is really what we should strive for.
Thank you, everyone. We have time for one more question before we turn it over to you all. I would like to talk about this concept of the mobile monument, which is very unique, coming from someone that works in public art and monuments. I can't think of many examples, so I do believe we will be making the example and making a model that lots of people can follow. And this was not my idea. This was something that was brainstormed together over many Zoom meetings where we talked about locations that this monument could launch. And then I believe Judy and Louisa were really saying, well, there's a lot of locations that this could really speak to, where we could take this that touches on the story, where we could reach new communities. And so I want to turn it over to you two first to talk about where we are right now, thinking about where the monument will go. And then Maddie and Tai, if you want to introduce other potential ideas. And yeah, okay, thank you.
When Neysa first contacted me about it, we talked about the cemetery. I'm sorry, but that is sacred ground. We cannot have people tramping through the graves. So Neysa and I took a tour. We went around Kansas City. We went to Wyandot County Museum, which has a lot of our artifacts. They have the shotgun that the Conley sisters used. There is a rattlesnake necklace that Helena wore. We want to bring in all of that. We want to tie it together. So the first thought was having it at the Wyandot County Museum. And I think that's going to be a good spot. I know people, through this week, I have been emailed by so many people that couldn't get into the play. I've worked on so many different community projects and committees that people said, get me in. But, it's important because people want to learn. And I think we have a potential of going in a great many more places than what we have already designed. So Wyandot County Museum will be number one. But I want to give a shout out to this little gal right here, Ann Lacey. Years ago, we were not let into really view what the Wyandot County Library had. It was, what do you want to see? Well, if you don't know what you want to see, we're not getting it out. We didn't know what was there. So I had been asked to put together a Wyandot Woman Conference, and we had it that year. Anne was first hired on. We contacted her. Oh my gosh, she opened up a world to us. And she is such a blessing to the Wyandot Nation because she has helped all of us see what artifacts are there. Now, why does the Wyandot County Museum and the Wyandot County Library have those artifacts? Well, William Conley, who is not related, he was the villain in the play. Part of his thing was, he would get a little part of that money too when the cemetery was sold. But William Walker had entrusted him with with most of the artifacts. And when he died, his wife thought, way to make money. So she put him up for sale. the Nebraska State Historical Society, the Kansas State Historical Society, Wyandotte County Museum, and the library has so many of our artifacts, and we are so grateful that they are protected there. So I just want to give that shout out to Ann because she has been a dream for us.
I love the idea of the fort and traveling to teach people, not just about the Conleys. It does introduce and open up the fact about not just the Wyandots, but natives and how strong. It tells a story about the strength in the women back in the day. They had no right to vote. They shouldn't have had a voice. How scary would it have been that back then to try to buck the establishment? But they had it. They also, in addition, they were native, so that even pushed them further down. I would love to see the fort. There's a event every year at the Nelson Art Gallery. It seems like it's in September or so, maybe October, but it's a Native American Day, and it's amazing. It brings in all the different tribes and representatives, and Haskell is a huge part of this, and they come, and they'll have, kids will dance, they'll have their powwow. Now powwow, keep in mind, is just a competitive thing. It's not necessarily this is how, everyone danced all the time, but it's incredible. You have that. So I think if you had the Conley sister, if you had the fort out there to tell the story to people that are coming to absorb and learn about the native culture, that to me would be ideal for someplace. I keep trying to get this.
Yeah, I'll just add quickly that I love the idea of the mobile monument one, because I think it's very poetic in that, our people, the Wyandots, we traveled all across the country because of removal. And in the play, when the sisters are children, they call us adventurers, which is a nice way to put it. But in a way, we were. So I love the poetry of a flexible mobile monument. And then two, I love it also because, theater, I love theater. A lot of people love theater, but you're not going to get everyone into the theater to come see a play, even though maybe they will after they see the monument. But I love that we're inviting people in and we're meeting them where they are, and we're bringing the story and really saying, like, please come and see this and have that curiosity, and we're really welcoming that by bringing this to, where the people are.
Yeah, I agree with everything they're saying. We are planning to take it to Johnson County Community College, again, just because it's where I work, and it's a large population we can hit, right? As you may know, it's the third largest higher ed institution in the state, and so when you have things there, it can have an impact. But I think one of the things we also need to think about is, like, what is a monument, right? Like, what are their purposes? And I think that in a lot of ways, this being framed as a monument is a really impressive act of resistance. And for Wyandots, I think, for sovereignty in terms of we are going to monumentalize ourselves, right? And not rely on sort of non-natives to construct, what counts as a monument. And its mobility, I think, is another part of that resistance. And it goes back to your education question. You could just hit a larger population, and not everyone learns from a book, right? Not everyone has access to a play. And so this is just another way to do that. But I certainly would like more education institutions to be an option. But I would say, if it's practical, anyone who's interested. I mean, I would love to see it at the State Museum in Topeka for a period, right? I wouldn't mind going on tour. What does that mean, I think there's just, if anyone's interested, that's the population we want to serve.
Thank you. There's a lot of light bulbs in my head now. Just a lot of things that I'm, again, hearing for the first time that I'm delighted by. I love, Fort Conley on tour. That's just incredible. Maybe that should be another subtitle. We'll have a whole bunch of subtitles as we move the project around. So I would love to open this up to the audience now. If you are interested in suggesting a place or you want to host Fort Conley on tour, now's your time. But we'd also just love to hear questions, comments, and it's probably tricky to pass the mic around, so I'll repeat the question. Yes.
When you say mobile, how big? Are we talking tractor trailer?
No.
About a 16-foot box trailer?
Yes, so the question is, when we say mobile, how big, what kind of scale are we talking about? That's a good question, because having worked with artists for many decades, lots of them like to go huge, just they say, tell me how much square footage I have, and I will still exceed that. And so I think that will be, we'll probably be thinking about what is reasonable, what can we move around. Like, we don't want to have, a giant truck taking it everywhere, or we don't want to have to only rely on spaces that can accommodate that. And so, some things we've already been talking about is it a structure that can be dismantled into smaller pieces that can be even shipped if we need to and built back up again? Or do we want to put it like on a flatbed truck and drive it somewhere? And, it's the joy and the challenge of working with artists. They're going to present things that we're like, oh my goodness, like we love this, but how in the world did we do this? And so artists will be, I think, giving us those ideas, and then we have to meet those challenges. But yes, there will be parameters. I think we're probably going to be thinking about first the different spaces we're going to take it to. And so if we have 3 anchor spaces and we know what they can accommodate, we can at least kind of start from there, like you can't exceed this, and not just, size and technology, but also money, right? If it's something that is so extraordinarily expensive to ship, it's going to limit our options and limit access and flexibility. So we'll get back to you on that. That's okay. But thank you for that question, because it's something we're talking about too. Yeah. Any other questions? Hi, yes?
Hi. I know that monuments sometimes come down to something that is a symbol that sort of tells a story just in that one visual moment that you see it, right? So I'm just curious from the panel, if each of you could give us what in your mind is one word or one thing that is emblematic of a message you want to send with this monument?
I'm going to try and repeat that. You said monuments can mean many things to many people. You might be experiencing it in a moment in time. And to summarize, you would like everyone on the panel to come up with a word that is emblematic of what
the message you want.
The message you want to send. Okay, one word that represents the message you want to send with this public art project.
I think we could accept phrase.
Yes, I think phrase.
I know.
I mean,
One
you're
word is just hard to do.
Or one thing.
Yeah.
Yeah. A thing, the symbol or the word.
Never quit, never give up.
Yes.
Never die.
Never,
say
yes, that's exactly it. We cannot give up. We did not give up. We are strong. I just wanted to emphasize part of the Wyandotte Women Warriors came from a conversation I had down in Oklahoma by a certain guy, and he told me that you're just a bunch of rogue Wyandotte women. You put something in a Wyandotte woman's head and they're just going to take off with it. Well, we asked the linguist, can you put that in Wyandotte words? Can you say rogue Wyandotte women? And he says, no, but I can do Wyandotte Women Warriors. And that's kind of how I talked to Neysa and the group, and I said, I think we really need to do this because they were strong Wyandotte Women Warriors. They were not going to back down. They were going to do what they had to do no matter what, even if it took their life.
Mm-hmm.
Oh, boy. Resilient. They weren't afraid, even in the face of adversity, but it was more than adversity. It it would have been in a day where they could have lost their life. So I am, and they tried to protect the cemetery, but there was also the destruction of, with Minnesota Avenue and 7th Street, if you think about it, and that was, Wyden took out a lot of graves. And that was one thing. I mean, they were here during the time of those expansions. You can see one picture of, is it Lida or Twain in a ditch, trying to, when the men would come and they had a job, they had to come in and they had to do construction or whatever, and they jump in the ditch. And they would have given their life for that. But the widening of the roads, there were bones, there were bodies. They were supposed to take them to Quindaro Cemetery. A lot of them didn't make it. They were put in wagons and they were dumped. They were down by the Missouri River. They were dumped there. The headstones. There was so much. So they had so much power and strength in themselves. This is several words. This is several words. But I did want to take a chance. It's too hard to
There's too many stories.
compartmentalize. But my grandfather was the one that gave the land when they broke it up, had the allotments. The cemetery was one of them. It was supposed to be in perpetuity. And it wasn't. And then they started, just like Ohio, just like other places, eating away at the land. And so there's just so, there would have been a lot more graves, but our families have been destroyed. I have dozens of family up there. And in the 1960s, people stopped wanting to be buried there because they kept hearing you're going to be dug up and they're going to go. There was this big battle of the cemetery still. And so they were afraid to be buried there. And until 2021, is that when Darren died? They had our first burial there again. So it was a long time. My grandmother she wanted to be buried there so bad, but you just didn't, because why be buried there and you're going to be dug up and who knows what they'll do with you. So my grandmother's favorite phrase, never trust a white man. And that was true, and that's what I was taught when I was little, and that's what she taught my daughter. So.
I just want to say also, if you see those pictures in 1950 in the cemetery, there was a beautiful entrance with steps going up from Minnesota Avenue, with gates at the top that they talk about marching up those steps and locking those gates. And when the city widened Minnesota Avenue, they took all that out. It breaks my heart. It just breaks my heart not to be able to have that part of the cemetery there. But there was also a side entrance to the east from the library that they would take the caskets up for the funerals and everything. And there you can see in that photograph, and I told Maddie she needs to use that in the play because that's an important part of how the cemetery would have been. And you know, they said that the sisters, Helena was so big into being the groundskeeper. They said that she had sculpted the bushes in designs like swans or angels or whatever. I can't imagine what that would have looked like. But you know, when you go to the cemetery, you're going to see there aren't very many headstones. And it breaks my heart to see that when the city came through and made those buildings, we have pictures of them where they just drove over them, took the headstones and threw them in the river. The main part of the headstones that are there are from Wyandot Nation of Kansas. All of my grandparents are there except my grandma. And she said she couldn't be buried there because she did not want to be dug up. But her son was buried there. But it'll break your heart when you see the cemetery red. And the city came through and gave brass plaques, made brass plaques to locate some of these graves, which you'll see. But the main headstones are gone.
I have one more comment, especially about Helena. And a few years back, there was a gentleman, Tom Kiefer, and he is Wyandot Nation in Oklahoma. And he generously came up and he restored the headstones. He cleaned them. He wanted to get the monuments set up that were sinking. Helena, he went to her monument, her gravestone, and it was really sunken, and especially in the back. So he tried and tried to get it. He had pulley systems, manual pulleys. Mind you, this was one gentleman, and he was in his 60s, and he was doing this by himself. And he used his truck. He used different things. 8 hours, nothing. Nothing happened with Helena. So finally, he said, Helena, I am not here to hurt the cemetery, to hurt your stone. I'm here to help. And then that monument, her headstone came up. And that's true. And Helena has a lot of stories. We have a lot of stories about her and her protection and her curses. There was a funeral there. And all the men around, she got mad, and she said, when you go home, your goldfish will be dead. And every one of those people that had goldfish, and they went home, and they were dead. There's a story written about her. She was extremely passionate to animals. And she met a gal that lived by her and mistreated a dog. And she said, if you don't stop on this day, you will die. That lady died on that day. So it wasn't little funny kind of things. She was.
One more thing. Her curses really are there.
Yes.
On her headstone it says, "Cursed be the villain who molests these graves." And she means it. When she passed, I know the gentleman that dug her grave. And Vic said, oh my gosh, I was sweating bullets the whole time. He said, I put everything just perfectly back in that grave, making sure everything was done, because that curse is there. It is. And to this day, there are things that happen in the cemetery that,
Thinking of the word, just real quick, the word that came to me was power, which we've mentioned, and at first I was like, oh, that sounds very ominous and imperial, but I think the idea that the monument is rooted in a collective, we think about collective movement. It wasn't one sister, it was 3 sisters, it was 4 sisters, it was the entire Wyandot people. The Wyandots of Kansas were all working to make this thing happen. And having that it's not a monument of a person, but it's the fort, which represented so many things. And the play, as we continue to layer in, that there were so many people also working with the Conley sisters, and I think this is just so representative of that.
Just to piggyback off that, I would say sovereignty, and all the challenges to exercising it, as you were saying, like even the city widening the street undermines.
You had a question.
The question is with the production getting ready to take place, to have like an architect historian that would meet the expectations of your tribal nation and the whoever's, to come up with something that would be more and appreciated for the future, if that makes any sense. I don't know if that's in store, if you have to go through the interior department or through the city, but at least something, because I understand the pathway, the little wood bridge walkway, so yes.
The wood bridge walkway has been kind of a contentious part. I do know why Wyandotte Nation of Oklahoma, because of the casino right next to them. And by the way, we are not part of the casino. Kansas is not part of that at all. But because the casino is there, they have taken care of the grounds and they do a beautiful job. And the security is awesome. It's been since, I think, 2008, I've been promised that a fence would go around the cemetery, and it just hasn't happened yet. And there's been a lot of different reasons why. It's not just Oklahoma, the city, everything. The bridge or the walkway, they do not want there for security reasons. They want to be able to fence off and totally close off the cemetery so people cannot have access. There's a lot of homeless in that area. There's a lot of drug paranoia in that area. They're just wanting to protect the ground, and that's why they don't want that walkway. We would love to have that walkway because you can park by the library and walk up it. Otherwise, you have to go all the way around and come in.
Okay, just one more question.
It's not really a question, but it's more, my mind is racing, Judith. My mind is just racing with all types of things, but the idea of this being mobile is just wonderful. I got the pleasure, I'm gonna cry. I got the pleasure several years ago of going on a trip where there were those of us from Oklahoma went with teachers from Oklahoma, from Ohio, from Michigan, and it was called The Journey of Understanding. And that was to teach educators the true story. And they went back and they have started rewriting the books of teaching. And they just went to in Michigan, where they taught 2,000 kids of all different ages the true stories of the various tribes, and one being Wyandot. And many, many years ago, they took a group of students to Ohio, and they were at the museum, and they were making a comment about, I think it was Grandma Solomon.
Mother Solomon?
Yeah, that she was the last Wyandot. And they're all standing there and they're like, we're Wyandot. People in Ohio thought the Wyandots were dead. And so they don't know what a great nation we have become. And so to take this on the road and to tell the story that we have survived and what we endured and that we have survived, I think it would be wonderful not just to take it across Kansas, Missouri, Oklahoma, but Ohio and Michigan, because it really tells how Native Americans have survived. We have not gone, but to tell our stories, to not let this happen again.
I have been told to get over it. We've won.
Yeah, no.
No, and we have our stories here in Kansas. Oklahoma has theirs. We want to hear their stories because they had a horrible time down there trying to survive.
We were all family.
They came back up here to get help, but right after the Civil War, we had nothing. We had nothing to help them with. We would have gladly helped them. But we need to bond together. And we have, let me tell you, when I go to Wyandotte, Oklahoma, I love it. when I go to Canada and involve myself with other Wyandots, Wendake, my heart is so full because I feel the sister and brotherhood between us all. And Wyandot Nation has opened up. They are so generous to us on culture days and everything. They give us discounts at the hotel, and they pay for all the prices of the crafts they teach and everything. And they're just absolutely wonderful, and they include all 4 of the bands. Any of the nations, the Confederacy, that wants to come are included. And I have to say that is a huge part of opening up our hearts.
Thank you so much. And I'm sorry, what is your name?
Marilyn Young.
Marilyn.
She's Wyandotte of Oklahoma.
I would love to wrap up with your word that I think David was looking for a word, and it's maybe survival, right? That's what this monument can be teaching to the people that thought Wyandots are no longer here. It's a monument of survival. So thank you so much for that. So we are going to wrap up now. I'm sorry. Yes.
Thank you. Could you tell me what the role is of any of the descendants of the slaves or the African American community that has been working on the restoration project? I'm not real knowledgeable about. I've been studying the last 15 or 20 years, and I started following it actually in the 80s. But I was curious about what, if any, the roles would be for the descendants of slaves and the African American community that's been working on the project.
Marvin should actually answer that, if you want to come up here and answer that.
I don't understand what he was asking.
What's the part of the survivors of these slaves that still live there? There are families that are still in Quindaro.
5th generation.
Go ahead.
Do you want to speak, Marvin?
I'm still not sure.
Okay. The role of the families that I know, 5th generation, and they're there, they're fighting along with Marvin and other members of the community. There's Representative Cleaver, Representative Davis, and Representative Turner in Kansas. They have come together with a bipartisan effort to try to push the Quindaro town site as a national historic landmark, which would be the last phase. And once that is done, then that kind of opens up the gates for the Department of Interior to give more money. The representatives in the community and the families, the generational families, have been a huge, huge help. And we kind of are one people because we helped their families, we adopted, and those stories still continue. So that bond is there. The one sad thing about how are they integrating their stories in the community? And it's sad because in the schools, they don't teach the children that. In Quindaro, they don't teach, those children don't even know about that their families were freedom seekers and they came across that river. And they were greeted by Wyandots, they were greeted by abolitionists, and we took them in, but we hid them, and if they wanted to go on north on their journey. There were other junctions along the way, and so we were one. There's a big commonality between the Native Americans and the slaves, the freedom seekers of Black, is because we were less than, and we both had our own journeys of being suppressed, being treated, cattle were treated better. So those feelings and those yearnings to have our stories told, and we each need to tell our own stories. Kansas needs to tell its stories. Nobody can tell our story. Nobody can tell Quindero's story. Nobody can tell Oklahoma's story. So, and the question is very good. A lot of families have left, but there are last maybe 8 or 10 family generational that are still there. I'm not sure. I'd have to ask. 9 that are still there. When the town was broken up during the Civil War, they went up on the hill and up on the cliff, and they are still there. So they stood proud. They made it there. That's where their freedom was, and that's where they staked their ground. And they tell their stories to the children and through oral history. But the school district is not doing justice and teaching them about the heritage that's right there, because it's going to go national. It's on the Underground Railroad. It's in the Senate and the Congress and all of that. So it's coming, and here children don't even know. So that's kind of the state of it.
Thank you so much. We can continue the conversation here at the cemetery, at the library, and we're going to be having more programs too. There's so many more avenues of conversation we can have around this. Before everybody goes on your individual paths, I just wanted to say a couple things. If you have time for a survey, to fill out a brief survey, I have a couple piles over here and a pile in the back. Little stacks. If you could fill those out and leave those for us, that is so important for grant making and for us to understand better how to connect with you, how we can make each program more engaging for you. If you are so inclined to donate, we have QR codes around the room, placed around the room. It's tax deductible. It goes straight to the Wyandot Nation of Kansas to further this project. They are a 501c3, and you can just scan that on your phone, and we very much appreciate it. As most of you know, there's a group of us going to the cemetery. There's a group of us going to the library. And if you wouldn't mind us saying a couple words about what people can expect to see at the library, that would be wonderful. Sure. Thank you.
I know that.
Yeah, anyway, thank you.
Hello, I'm Ann Lacey, and I'm the Kansas Collection Librarian at the Kansas City, Kansas Public Library. And on the second floor of the library, we'll have the auditorium open where we will have some items. In the Kansas room, we are devoted to being a resource for Wyandot County history, and we hold a small collection of Wyandot Conley's papers. So some of the things that we'll have on display are her law school graduation program, her business card, her voter registration certificate from 1920. She wasted no time registering to vote, and some of her correspondence. So I hope you all can join us. Thank you very much.
Thank you, my esteemed panelists. I'm so grateful that you could all be here today. And thank you all for coming.